She flew to Vegas for a team retreat and texted me a photo of her wedding certificate. She thought she could take everything. She didn't know I already had a lawyer on speed dial and was about to uncover her felony. There's a kind of quiet that isn't peace. It's just an absence of sound, a vacuum where laughter and conversation used to be. For the better part of 2 years, that vacuum was the soundtrack to my life. My 7-year marriage to Elena had become a masterpiece of polite distance, a carefully constructed stage play where we both knew our lines but had long forgotten the meaning behind them. Our house, a beautiful 2-story colonial I'd bought before we even met, was my sanctuary and my prison. I found my solace in the things I could control. The rose garden in the backyard was my particular obsession. Pruning the thorns, nurturing the buds, imposing order on nature. It was a therapy of sorts. I remember one Saturday afternoon, the sun was warm on my back as I snipped away a dead leaf from a prize-winning hybrid tea rose. I could smell the rich soil and the faint perfume of the blossoms. It was peaceful, or it should have been. Elena slid the glass door open. She didn't step outside. She just stood in the doorway, the cool air from the house spilling into the garden. She was scrolling on her phone, a familiar silhouette against the light. "Art," she said, her voice distant. "I saw the new Galliano bag is out. The one I showed you. I didn't look up from my rose bush. Oh yeah. I think I need it. For the networking event next week." I didn't sigh. I didn't argue. I didn't ask how a $5,000 handbag was a business necessity. I just pulled out my own phone, tapped the banking app, and sent the money to our joint account. "Okay," I said. "It's there." "Thanks," she said, and the glass door slid shut. And there it was. The transaction. The quiet, hollow feeling that followed. I stared at the perfect rose in my hand, its petals a flawless crimson, and felt absolutely nothing. This was my life now, a series of transactions to maintain a fragile, artificial peace. Later that evening, my older brother, David, called. Dave's a mechanic, a man whose hands are perpetually stained with grease and whose honesty is just as ingrained. He doesn't do subtle. "Art," he grunted. "Saw Elena's new car on her Instagram." "Another one?" "It's a lease, Dave. Good for her image at work." He was silent for a moment. I could almost hear him wiping his hands on a rag. "Right, her image. Listen, brother, I was by her place to drop off those tools, and I saw the credit card statement on the counter. It's insane. She's not just spending money, she's burning it. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "She works hard. She deserves it. I can handle it." "It's not about handling it, Art," he said, his voice softening slightly. "It's about what you're paying for. You're paying for a ghost to live in your house." I ended the call soon after, telling him he was overreacting. But his words stuck with me, sharp and uncomfortable. A ghost in my house. He was right. And the worst part was, I was the one leaving out offerings to keep it from rattling its chains too loudly. I was the curator of my own haunted museum. The ghost David talked about hadn't always been there. It had moved in slowly, silently, after we'd faced the biggest battle of our marriage and lost. We wanted kids. God, we wanted them more than anything. It was the one dream that was truly, unequivocally ours. The house was big enough. Our finances were stable. We were ready. But biology, in its cruel indifference, didn't care what we were ready for. The first couple of years were a cycle of hope and heartbreak that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Timed cycles, hormone shots, endless doctor's appointments. Each month was a 2-week wait filled with whispered prayers, followed by the silent, crushing arrival of another failure. I remember one afternoon with perfect, painful clarity. We were sitting in the car in the parking lot of the fertility clinic. The specialist, a kind woman with sad eyes, had just gently explained that our 3rd round of IVF had failed. There was nothing more she could recommend. I stared straight ahead, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. My instinct, my core programming as a man and a project manager, was to fix it, to find a new angle, a new solution. "Okay," I said, my voice a low rasp. "So, we can look at other clinics. I read about one in Colorado. They have experimental treatments. The cost isn't an issue. We can..." "Stop." Elena's voice was barely a whisper. She was looking out her window at a family getting out of a minivan, a little girl with pigtails chasing her brother around a lamppost. "Just stop trying to fix it, Art," she said, a tear finally tracing a path down her cheek. Maybe some things aren't meant to be fixed. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to comfort her when I couldn't solve the problem. So I said nothing. I just started the car and drove us home in a silence that was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. That was the day the ghost was born. She threw herself into her career with a terrifying new ferocity. I threw myself into mine. It was our unspoken treaty. We wouldn't talk about the gaping hole in the center of our lives if we could fill the space around it with promotions, bonuses, and the shiny distractions money could buy. I thought I was supporting her. I thought that by taking on all the financial stress, by giving her the lifestyle she seemed to crave, I was making her happy. Or at least less sad. Years later, maybe a year before the end, I was searching for an old tax document in the spare room upstairs. It was a room we never used, filled with old furniture and boxes. Tucked away in the back of the closet, I found a sealed cardboard box. It wasn't labeled. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled it out and sliced the tape with my pocket knife. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a tiny pair of white baby shoes, a half-knitted blue blanket, a children's book, Good Night Moon. My breath caught in my throat. She had bought these things years ago in a burst of hopeful certainty. This room, I realized with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty, was supposed to have been the nursery. I stood there for a long time in the dusty, silent room, holding the tiny shoe in the palm of my hand. The weight of all our unspoken grief, of everything we'd lost and never mourned together, crashed down on me. I didn't cry. I just carefully put everything back in the box, retaped it, and pushed it back into the darkness of the closet. I never mentioned it to her. It was another ghost, another secret to keep, in a house that was already full of them. The final act began, as so many tragedies do, with a cheerful announcement. Elena breezed into the kitchen one Tuesday evening, radiating a kind of manic energy I hadn't seen in years. "Guess what?" she said, pouring herself a glass of wine. "The company is sending the entire senior management team on a team-building retreat. A full week." "Oh yeah," I said, looking up from my laptop. "That's generous. Where to?" "Vegas," she said, her eyes shining. "Can you believe it? A whole week in Vegas, all expenses paid. Saturday to Friday." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. It wasn't jealousy. It was my project manager's brain, the logical, analytical part of me, screaming that something was wrong. "A full week?" I asked slowly. "In Las Vegas? For team building? What kind of company shuts down its entire senior management for a week-long party?" "That's not team building, Elena. That's a corporate write-off for a bender." Her smile vanished. The cheerful energy evaporated, replaced by a defensive chill. "What's your problem? Can't you just be happy for me?" "I'm not trying to start a fight," I said, holding my hands up. "I'm just trying to understand. It sounds unusual. What's the agenda? Are there conferences? Seminars?" "Oh my God, Art," she snapped, her voice rising. "You always have to ruin everything. Why do you have to question every single thing? Are you saying I'm lying? You think I'm making this up?" The speed of her escalation was dizzying. We'd gone from 0 to 100 in under 30 seconds. I kept my own voice level, trying to de-escalate. "Elena, I'm your husband. It's not crazy for me to want to understand what you're doing for a full week in another state, especially in Vegas. It's none of your business," she shot back. "My work is my work. You're not my keeper. I'm the one paying the mortgage on this house. I'm the one who funded the down payment on your car. I think that earns me the right to ask a simple question without being accused of a crime." The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd crossed a line. I'd brought money into it, the one thing that had become the foundation of our broken marriage. Her eyes narrowed to slits. She walked right up to me, her face inches from mine. Her voice was low, but it dripped with a venom that scared me more than her shouting. "You want to talk about what you pay for?" she hissed. "Fine. Let's be clear. I am still in this marriage because I choose to be, because it is still, for the moment, convenient for me. But you are pushing me, Art. You keep pushing me with this pathetic insecurity, and I swear to God, I will end it. And when I do, I will take everything from you. Your house, your savings, half your damn pension. I will burn your whole world to the ground. Don't you ever test me. I just stood there, stunned into silence. This wasn't the woman I married. This was a stranger, a hostile tenant in my home, laying out the terms of her occupation. She held my gaze for another long, terrifying moment before turning on her heel and storming out of the room. The conversation was over. She left for Las Vegas that Saturday. The house fell silent again, but this time, the quiet wasn't hollow. It was heavy. It was the suffocating quiet of a truce before a war. I replayed her threat over and over in my head, but a part of me, the hopeful, foolish part, still thought she was just bluffing, just blowing off steam. I had no idea how wrong I was. The week Elena was gone was strange. The first couple of days, the house felt cavernous, her absence a palpable presence. I kept expecting to hear her keys in the door or her car in the driveway. By Tuesday, a different feeling had settled in. Peace. I came home from work, and there was no tension hanging in the air. I could put on my music, cook what I wanted, and sit in the living room without the unspoken pressure of her moods. It was a sad realization. My home felt more like a home when she wasn't in it. I didn't call or text her. Her threat had drawn a clear line in the sand, and honestly, I didn't know what to say. More than that, a part of me didn't want to break the fragile peace I was experiencing. I told myself I was giving her space. Thursday evening arrived. It was the day before she was due to come home. I was on the couch, watching some mindless action movie, a beer sweating on the coaster beside me. For the first time in a long time, I felt relaxed. I was winding down, my mind blissfully empty. Then my phone buzzed on the cushion next to me. I glanced at the screen. A message from Elena. My first thought was, here we go. The pre-arrival argument. I braced myself for a text complaining about the flight time or demanding I pick up her dry cleaning. I opened the message. My brain just stalled. It was like a computer trying to process a corrupted file. Everything froze. It was a picture. Elena, smiling wider and more genuinely than I'd seen in years. Next to her was a man I recognized vaguely from a company holiday party photo she'd shown me once. Her boss, Jared. They were standing in front of a brightly lit, slightly tacky-looking chapel. He had his arm around her. They both looked ecstatic. Beneath the photo was a line of text. 3 short, brutal sentences designed to inflict maximum damage. Just married my boss. You're a wallet, not a husband. You're pathetic, by the way, for not even checking on me. I read it once. Then again, the world around me seemed to fade to a dull hum. The action movie on the TV, the half-empty beer bottle, the familiar comfort of my own living room. It all just dissolved. I wasn't feeling one emotion. I was feeling all of them at once. A tidal wave of betrayal, confusion, disgust, and a strange, terrifying sense of release all crashed down on me simultaneously. A wallet. That's all I was. All the years, all the support, all the sacrifices I'd made to keep our fragile world from shattering. It all came down to that. I was an ATM, a pathetic one at that. Something inside me, something that had been slowly dying for years, finally broke. But it wasn't a sad break. It was a clean snap, like a bone setting back into place. The years of confusion, of walking on eggshells, of hoping for a return to something that was already dead, it all evaporated in that single, clarifying moment. The fog was gone. My thumbs moved over the screen, my hands surprisingly steady. I typed one word. Noted, and I hit send. Then, with a presence of mind that surprised even me, I took a screenshot of the entire exchange. Evidence. My project manager brain was already taking over. This was no longer a marriage. It was a hostile situation, and I needed to manage the fallout. I set my phone down, stood up, and walked to the kitchen. I poured the rest of my beer down the drain, my hand not shaking in the slightest. Then I picked up my phone again and dialed the one person I knew I could count on for sound, strategic advice. My college buddy and one of the sharpest family lawyers in the state, Marcus. He answered on the second ring. Marcus, I said, my voice eerily calm. I need your help. I'm emailing you something right now. Look at it, and then tell me what to do next. Marcus called me back less than 5 minutes after I sent the email. There was no shock or pity in his voice, just the cool, crisp tone of a lawyer shifting into gear. Art, he said. Okay, I've seen it. First things first, do not engage with her further. Not another text, not a phone call. Nothing. You got that? Got it. I replied, my voice a monotone. Good. Second, she comes back tomorrow. We need to move fast, and we need to move silently. You're at home. Yes. Perfect. We're going to war, Art. But it's going to be a quiet war. A war fought with paper and logistics. She wants to play games? We're going to show her what it looks like when a grown-up plays for keeps. For the next 2 hours, Marcus walked me through a precise, methodical plan of attack. It was like a switch had been flipped in my brain. The hurt, confused husband was gone, replaced by the project manager I was at work. This was now Project Reclamation. My life was the objective, and Elena was the hostile variable that needed to be contained. My first call was to the 24/7 fraud department of our primary bank. I reported that the joint account had been compromised by a third party, referencing a potential unauthorized marriage, which was technically true. The agent, likely bewildered but bound by protocol, immediately placed a freeze on the account and all associated debit cards. That was Elena's primary source of my money. Severed. Next, the credit cards. One by one, I called them. American Express, Visa, the department store cards. I used the same rationale. A compromised situation, a potential for fraudulent activity. I requested that all supplementary cards, her cards, be canceled immediately. I could almost hear the satisfying snip of the virtual scissors. She wanted to play games? She could do it on her own dime, not mine. The second part of the plan was securing the fortress. My house. My sanctuary. Marcus had been adamant about this. She can't have access, Art. Not after a threat like that, and this stunt. We claim you fear for your safety and property. We make it official. I went online and found a 24-hour locksmith. I scheduled them to come out at 8 a.m. the next morning. A full replacement, front door, back door, garage, even the lock on the side gate. The house I'd bought with my own hard-earned money, years before I'd even met her, was about to become mine again. Truly mine. The final step was the legal groundwork. I spent an hour gathering documents. The deed to the house, clearly showing my name as the sole owner. Our prenuptial agreement, which we'd signed at my insistence. Something she'd laughed about at the time, calling it unromantic. Tax returns. Bank statements. I scanned everything and created a secure digital folder, which I then shared with Marcus. The subject line of the email was simple: assets secured. By the time I went to bed that night, it was well past 2 a.m. But I wasn't tired. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a cold, clean energy I hadn't felt in a decade. I was no longer the passive doormat, the wallet, the pathetic husband waiting for his wife to remember how to love him. I was a man taking back his life. She had built a bonfire to burn me. She had no idea I was about to use the flames to forge a sword. Friday was a blur of controlled chaos. The locksmith arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, just as I was finishing my coffee. He was a burly guy with a sympathetic look in his eyes, as if he'd seen this kind of drama 100 times before. In less than an hour, every entry point to my home had a new lock. I held the new set of keys in my hand. They felt heavier than the old ones, weighted with a new sense of finality. I went to work, but I couldn't focus. My mind was a split screen. On one side, the spreadsheets and reports I was supposed to be reviewing. On the other, the live feed from my home security cameras, which I had open on a second monitor. I didn't know her exact flight details, but I knew she'd be coming. The alert came around 2 p.m. An Uber pulled into my driveway. I watched as Elena got out, dragging her suitcase behind her. There was a confidence in her stride, a certain smugness in the way she walked up the stone path. She looked like a queen returning to her castle. I watched her reach into her purse for her keys. I watched her slide the key into the lock. I watched her turn it. Nothing. She frowned, tried again. Then she tried the handle. Locked. Her confidence began to dissolve, replaced by a flicker of confusion. She walked to the back door, disappearing from the camera's view for a moment, then reappeared at the front, her face now a mask of irritation. She started pounding on the door. Then she pulled out her phone. A few moments later, My phone rang. It was her. I let it go to voicemail. Her next call, I knew, would be to the police. And I was ready. About 20 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up. Two officers got out, a man and a woman, looking professional and weary. I watched them talk to Elena, who was putting on a masterful performance. I could see her gesticulating, her expression one of worried, tearful victimhood. Then my phone rang again. This time, it was from the local police department. Mr. Jensen? This is Officer Davis. We're at your residence. Your wife is here, and she says she's been locked out of her home. Can you come down and clarify the situation? Of course, officer, I said, my voice calm and steady. I'll be there in 15 minutes. I had a go bag ready in my car, containing a folder with all the necessary documents. When I pulled up, Elena glared at me, her eyes burning with hate. The victim act had vanished. I ignored her and addressed the officers. Good afternoon, officers. Thank you for coming. I handed them the folder. Here is the deed to the property, which you'll see is solely in my name, purchased in 2015, 3 years before our marriage. Here is a copy of our prenuptial agreement, which outlines property rights. And here, I said, pulling out my phone, is a message my wife sent me from Las Vegas last night. I showed them the screenshot. The male officer's eyebrows shot up. The female officer's expression hardened. Officers, I continued, my tone measured and reasonable. My wife voluntarily left the marital home for a week. She then informed me she has married another man and proceeded to threaten me implicitly. Given the contents of this message and her clear emotional instability, I no longer feel safe with her having access to my property or my person. This is my home. I have changed the locks to protect myself. Elena exploded. He's lying. It was a joke. A stupid Vegas prank. You can't just throw me out on the street. The female officer, Davis, turned to her. Ma'am, is this your signature on the prenup? Well, yes, but... And did you send this text message? It was a joke, she shrieked, her voice cracking. We were drunk. It's Vegas. Everyone knows it's not real. Officer Davis looked from the phone to Elena, her face unreadable. Then she turned to me. Sir, this is a civil matter. We can't force entry. If she wants to retrieve personal belongings, you'll have to arrange that through your lawyers. Then she looked at Elena. Ma'am, you need to leave the property. You can have your lawyer contact us. If you don't leave, you'll be trespassing. The meltdown that followed was spectacular. It was a full-blown reality show tantrum on my front lawn. She screamed. She cried. She called me every name in the book. She accused the police of siding with a monster. I just stood there impassive. Where her tirade finally ran out of steam, I looked at the officers. Thank you for your help. If she needs a taxi, I'm happy to pay for it. Then, without another glance at the raging, defeated woman who had been my wife, I walked up the path, unlocked my new lock with my new key, and stepped inside. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home behind me was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my world finally being mine again. The weekend was a blur of legal strategy sessions. I spent most of it at Marcus's office, fueled by black coffee and a cold, burning sense of purpose. The meltdown on the lawn had been satisfying on a visceral level, but Marcus was quick to remind me that this was just the opening skirmish. Public tantrums don't win court cases, Art, he said, leaning back in his leather chair. Evidence does. We have a good start, but we need to build an ironclad case. Her defense is going to be, it was a joke, I was drunk. We need to prove it was a deliberate, calculated act of betrayal. On Monday morning, Marcus's team went on the offensive. His paralegal, a sharp young woman named Chloe, was tasked with getting official confirmation for Nevada. It was surprisingly easy. She contacted the Clark County Recorder's office, and for a small fee, they emailed over a scanned, certified copy of the marriage certificate. There it was in black and white. Elena Marie Jensen and Jared Michael Prescott. Signed, witnessed, and legally filed. It wasn't a prank certificate from an Elvis impersonator. It was the real deal. And here's where it gets interesting. Marcus said, pointing at the screen, I ran a background check on Mr. Prescott. Meet his wife, Sophie Prescott. Married 12 years, 2 kids. My stomach turned. So he was married to? Both of them. Bingo. Marcus said, a grim smile on his face. We're not just talking about adultery anymore, Art. This is bigamy, a felony in this state. And in Nevada, that single piece of information changed the entire landscape of the battle. This wasn't just a messy divorce anymore. This was a criminal matter. Marcus immediately drafted 2 documents. The first was the official divorce filing. We filed on the grounds of irreconcilable differences and adultery, and we attached the marriage certificate as Exhibit A. We requested a full and complete separation of assets, citing the prenuptial agreement and Elena's egregious fault, including the commission of a felony. The second document was a formal report to the district attorney's office. It laid out the facts clearly. 2 individuals, both legally married to other people, had entered into a fraudulent marriage contract. We attached the certificate, screenshots of the text messages, and a brief summary of the situation. We weren't just asking for a divorce. We were initiating a criminal investigation. While the legal gears were turning, I had to deal with the practicalities. I spent hours on the phone with financial advisors, moving my savings and investments into new, individual accounts. I closed every joint line of credit. It was like a painstaking separation of 2 intertwined root systems, and I was determined not to leave a single thread connected. A few days later, Elena's new lawyer sent a blustering, aggressive letter demanding immediate access to the house and the unfreezing of all accounts, claiming I was engaging in financial abuse. Marcus's reply was short and brutal. He attached a copy of the criminal complaint filed with the DA and a note. Dear counsel, your client has committed a felony. Any claims to marital assets are nullified by our fraudulent actions and the existing prenuptial agreement. Our next communication will be in a courtroom. Sincerely, Marcus Thorne. The blustering stopped. Her lawyer didn't reply. They knew, as we did, that the game had changed. Elena had thought she was playing checkers. She was about to find out we were playing a very different game, and we were coming for the king. Or in this case, the queen. For about a week, there was silence. It was the unnerving quiet of the enemy regrouping. I knew Elena and her new husband/boss/co-felon, Jared, were likely scrambling, trying to figure out how to spin their drunken joke into something a district attorney might believe. I used the time to try and find a sense of normalcy, working long hours and spending evenings with my brother, Dave, who was a rock of steady, no-nonsense support. Then, one evening, I got a call from Marcus. Art, you need to see this, he said, his voice tight with something I couldn't quite identify. I'm sending you an email from a Sophie P. Read it. I opened my laptop, my heart hammering in my chest. The email was short, but it hit me like a physical blow. To Mr. Thorne, my name is Sophie Prescott. I am, or was, the wife of Jared Prescott. I believe your client, Mr. Arthur Jensen, is divorcing his wife for marrying my husband. I have been doing my own research since discovering their trip to Las Vegas on our credit card statements. My husband is a predator and a liar, and Ms. Jensen is his latest victim or willing accomplice. I no longer care which. He has a history of this. I have proof. I want him to be held accountable for the financial and emotional damage he has inflicted on my family. I'm scheduled to meet with my own lawyer tomorrow, but I believe we may have a mutual interest in sharing information. Please have Mr. Jensen contact me if he is willing. Sincerely, Sophie Prescott. I had to read the email 3 times. An alliance. An ally from the one place I never would have expected. Jared's wife. I call Marcus back immediately. What do we do? We call her. Marcus said without hesitation. This could be the key to everything. But be careful, Art. She's a woman who's just had her world blown apart. This is a delicate situation. The next day, Marcus and I sat in his conference room for a video call with Sophie. She was not what I expected. There were no tears, no hysterics. She was a woman in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of coiled, controlled fury. She was an accountant, and she had the receipts to prove it. For the next hour, she laid out Jared's history of deception with chilling precision. This wasn't his first affair, just the most blatant one. She had been suspicious for years, but had stayed for the kids. The Vegas marriage was the final, unforgivable insult. He thought he was clever, Sophie said, her voice like ice. He booked the trip on a corporate card, then paid it back from our personal account, trying to bury it. But he's sloppy. Then she delivered the payload. For the past 2 years, he's been using his corporate expense account to fund his affairs. Dinners, gifts, even short-term apartment rentals. He codes them as client entertainment. Elena Jensen's name appears as the client on dozens of these reports. He's not just a cheater, he's a thief. I have copies of everything. Marcus and I looked at each other. This was a goldmine. It blew Elena's drunken mistake narrative to smithereens. This wasn't a one-time fling. It was a long-term, calculated affair subsidized by fraud. Sophie, Marcus said carefully, what do you want? I want a divorce that leaves him with nothing but the clothes on his back, she said, her eyes flashing. And I want to make sure that woman doesn't get a cent from your client, because every dollar she got was a dollar stolen from my family's future. I will provide you with everything I have. You use it to protect your client. I will use it to protect my children. Is that a deal? Yes, I said, finding my voice. Yes, it is. We ended the call. I sat there in the sterile conference room, a strange mix of disgust and gratitude washing over me. Elena's grand betrayal had not just created one enemy. It had created two, and we were now working together. The deposition was scheduled a month later. It took place in a sterile, soulless conference room in a downtown office building. The air was thick with tension and the faint smell of old coffee. I sat next to Marcus. Across the long, polished table sat Elena and her lawyer, a slick-looking man named Grossman who radiated an aura of false confidence. Jared was not present. His deposition was scheduled for the following day. Grossman started with a series of questions designed to paint me as a controlling, emotionally distant husband. He asked about my work hours, my hobbies, why I questioned her trip to Vegas. I answered each question calmly and truthfully, sticking to the facts, just as Marcus had coached me. And when your wife informed you that the so-called marriage was merely a prank, an alcohol-fueled mistake, you refused to let her back into the marital home. Is that correct? Grossman asked, leaning forward with a theatrical air of disbelief. I refused to let a person who had committed a felony and sent me a threatening text message back into my private property. Yes, I replied calmly. Grossman scoffed. A felony? Mr. Jensen, it was a joke that went too far. There was no malicious intent. Marcus, who had been silent until now, slowly pushed a thick binder across the table. Mr. Grossman, he said, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable authority. Perhaps you'd like to review Exhibit B before you continue with that line of questioning. Grossman opened the binder. I watched his face as he flipped through the pages. The smug confidence began to falter, replaced by a growing look of concern. He was looking at copies of Jared's expense reports provided by Sophie. Page after page of them. Dinners at five-star restaurants, jewelry purchases, hotel stays, all coded as client entertainment, with Elena Jensen listed as the client, dating back nearly 18 months. These documents appear to show a long-term, financially entwined relationship, Marcus said conversationally. It hardly paints the picture of a spontaneous, drunken mistake in Vegas. Wouldn't you agree? Grossman swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. He looked at Elena, who was staring at the binder with wide, horrified eyes. She seemed to be shrinking in her chair. Now, Marcus continued, pushing a second binder across the table. Let's move on to Exhibit C. This binder contained the sworn affidavit from Elena's HR director, stating unequivocally that no corporate retreat had ever been scheduled. It also contained hotel folios from the Bellagio, in the name of Mr. and Mrs. Jared Prescott, showing charges for room service, champagne, and tickets to a show. Grossman didn't even open this one. He just stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. Then came the final move. Marcus placed a small digital audio recorder on the table. And finally, Exhibit D, he said. This is a voicemail Mr. Prescott left for a friend the day after his joke wedding. His wife, my associate counsel in this matter, was kind enough to provide it. Perhaps you'd like a listen? He pressed play. Jared's smug, drunken voice filled the silent room. Yeah, man, totally sealed the deal. Got the promotion, got the girl a real 2-for-1. She's crazy about me. Thinks we're going to run away together. Meanwhile, My old lady at home hasn't got a clue. It's perfect. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. I looked at Elena. The color had drained completely from her face. She was staring at the audio recorder with an expression of pure, unadulterated devastation. In that moment, she finally understood. She wasn't Jared's partner in crime. She was just another line item on his expense report. She was the punchline to his sick joke. Grossman cleared his throat. He slowly closed the binders and pushed them back across the table. He looked at Marcus, then at me. His slick demeanor was gone, replaced by the weary look of a man who knows he's been utterly, comprehensively outplayed. I believe, he said quietly, that my client and I need a moment to confer. This deposition is over. Marcus simply nodded. Checkmate. The deposition was the turning point. It was the moment the flimsy house of cards Elena and Jared had built came crashing down in spectacular fashion. After that, things moved with a swift and brutal efficiency. Elena's lawyer, Grossman, called Marcus the very next day. The aggressive posturing was gone, replaced by a desperate attempt at damage control. They offered to settle. They wanted to make the whole thing go away quietly. Marcus's response was ice cold. There will be no settlement, he told him. Your client will either sign the divorce agreement as written, relinquishing all claims, or we will see her in both family and criminal court. The choice is hers. Faced with the mountain of evidence against her, Elena folded. She signed the papers, agreeing to the divorce on our terms. No alimony, no division of assets, no claim to my house, my savings, or my pension. The prenuptial agreement was honored in full, and her own actions had sealed her fate. She walked away with nothing but her personal belongings and a mountain of legal debt. But the consequences didn't end there. The district attorney's office, armed with the evidence we provided, formally charged both Elena and Jared with bigamy. Jared's world imploded. His wife, Sophie, armed with the proof of his embezzlement and infidelity, filed for divorce and took him to the cleaners. Their company, faced with a brewing scandal and evidence of corporate fraud, fired him immediately and initiated its own lawsuit to recover the stolen funds. He went from a high-flying executive to an unemployed, disgraced criminal defendant in a matter of weeks. Elena's fate was just as grim. When her company learned of the criminal charges and the fraudulent nature of her business trips, they terminated her employment for gross misconduct. The career she had sacrificed her marriage for was gone. Her criminal case dragged on for a few more months. She tried to stick to her it was a joke defense, but the prosecution, using the evidence from our deposition, systematically dismantled it. The judge didn't see it as a harmless mistake. He saw it for what it was, a deliberate, fraudulent act. Ultimately, the court decided against jail time, likely because it was a first offense, and the public humiliation was deemed a significant punishment in itself. But she didn't walk away unscathed. She was found guilty of a felony, sentenced to 2 years of probation, ordered to complete 200 hours of community service, and slapped with a $10,000 fine. A felony record. That would follow her forever, a permanent stain on her reputation and her future employment prospects. Her little Vegas stunt, her grand, dramatic gesture of defiance, hadn't just cost her a marriage. It had cost her everything. Her job, her financial security, her reputation, and her future. She had gambled it all on a single, spiteful act, and she had lost in the most absolute way possible. The day the divorce was finalized was anticlimactic. I got an email from Marcus with a final decree attached. I opened it, read the words, and then closed my laptop. There was no surge of victory, no desire to celebrate. Just a quiet, profound sense of relief. It was over. The war was finally over. A few weeks later, my brother Dave came over to help me with the last piece of the puzzle, getting rid of Elena's remaining possessions. Her lawyer had arranged for her to pick up a few boxes of clothes and personal items while I was out of the house. Everything else, the designer furniture she'd insisted on, the expensive art that never felt like me, the countless shoes and handbags, was left behind. We spent a Saturday loading a rented truck. It was hard work, a physical exorcism of her presence from my home. We hauled out a ridiculously oversized velvet couch, a glass dining table that was always covered in fingerprints, and box after box of things she'd bought, but barely used. I never understood why she needed 8 different sets of dinner plates, Dave grunted, hefting a heavy box labeled kitchen. Neither did I said, and for the first time, I could smile about it without a trace of bitterness. The last room was the spare room upstairs. It was mostly empty now, except for a few pieces of old furniture. And in the back of the closet, the sealed cardboard box. I pulled it out. Dave looked at me, a question in his eyes. I didn't need to explain. He just knew. I opened it and looked inside one last time at the tiny shoes and the half-finished blanket. Symbols of a dream that had died long before my marriage did. You keeping that? Dave asked gently. I thought for a moment. Holding on to it felt like holding on to the ghost, to the grief that had poisoned everything. It was time to let it all go. No, I said, my voice clear. It's part of a life that doesn't exist anymore. I taped the box shut. I didn't label it. It didn't need a label. I carried it downstairs and placed it carefully in the truck with everything else. It was the last thing to go. We drove the truck to a local charity that helped families get back on their feet. As we watched them unload the remnants of my married life, I didn't feel loss. I felt lighter. Driving home, Dave looked over at me. You know, he said, for a while there, I was worried about you, Art. I thought you'd lost yourself. I looked out at the road ahead, the setting sun casting long shadows. I think I had to, I replied. I had to lose that version of myself to find the one I was supposed to be. That night, for the first time in years, I slept soundly in my own house. The quiet was no longer a vacuum. It was peace. The ghosts were gone. In the months that followed, I learned to live in the quiet. I rediscovered myself, piece by piece. I found joy in simple things. The smell of coffee in the morning, the satisfaction of a finished project at work, the sound of my own music filling the rooms of my house. The house itself began to feel like mine again. I replaced her cold, modern furniture with comfortable, well-worn pieces that felt like home. I painted the walls a warm, inviting color. I made a space for me. I often found myself on the back porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, a glass of bourbon in my hand. It was in those quiet moments that I did the most difficult work, reflecting. It would have been easy to cast myself as the blameless victim, and God knows what she did was unforgivable. But the truth, the kind of truth you can only admit to yourself in the twilight, was more complicated. A marriage doesn't die overnight. It dies by 1,000 tiny cuts, 1,000 unspoken resentments, 1,000 moments of turning away instead of turning towards. I thought about my own role in the decay. I remembered all the times I'd retreated into my work, using it as a shield against her sadness and my own helplessness. I remembered how I'd started using money as a substitute for emotional intimacy, trying to patch a sinking ship with dollar bills because I was too scared to admit the ocean was already inside. My silence, my avoidance of confrontation, it was its own kind of betrayal. I didn't fight for us when it mattered. I only fought for myself when it was all over. Did I push her away? Did I have a hand in creating the woman who could send that text from Vegas? I'll never know for sure. Maybe our shared grief was a wound too deep for either of us to heal. Maybe she was always destined to break. Maybe I was always destined to enable it. But sitting there on my porch, I realized that assigning blame was a pointless game. It didn't matter who lit the match when the whole house was already soaked in gasoline. All that mattered was that I had survived the fire. I had walked out of the rubble, shaken and scarred, but whole. I don't hate Elena. I don't think about her much at all anymore. When I do, I feel a distant, abstract pity for the woman she became, a person so lost in her own unhappiness that her only solution was to burn everything down. Her spectacular act of self-destruction had been, ironically, the greatest gift she could have ever given me. It was a clean break, a definitive end. It gave me the freedom I would have been too scared to take for myself. One evening, my phone buzzed. It wasn't a message that made my stomach clench. It was from a friend I'd made at a hiking club I'd recently joined. Drinks tonight? The usual spot? 7 p.m. I looked up from the phone at the last sliver of sun disappearing below the horizon. The air was cool and clean. The quiet was peaceful. I thought about the offer. A simple, easy, uncomplicated invitation. A new chapter. A real smile spread across my face. I typed back a reply. I'll be there.